another episode of Gar Borras' Time Machine. Gar, today we're going to be talking all about American Bandstand. So we're going back in your time machine all the way back to 1952 when American Bandstand first premiered on television. And you and I were kind of just talking before we went on the air, and we both learned quite a bit about American Bandstand that we weren't aware of prior to doing the research. So I guess let's get right into it. We'll start off the show with you sharing with us how did you first become a fan of American Bandstand, or at least become aware of it?
Well, when I was a kid, my dad, used to like to watch those dance shows.
Yeah.
And so he would have those on, and of course, as a kid, that's hey Dad, can I watch that with you?
Yeah.
That kind of thing, and I started watching it. And I started noticing why my dad liked to watch those shows is because the girls were really hot.
Yeah.
And by the time I was kind of getting involved in it, it was more like the 60s and the 70s.
Yeah.
And once the 70s came around, the girls were kind of scantily clad.
Yeah.
Scantily dressed.
That was kind of before they had standards.
I'm sure that's the reason why my dad really enjoyed watching it, because there was a lot of girls and they were hot. They were very scantily dressed.
And just to let people know where we're the time frame we're talking here, the show aired from October 7th, 1952 to October 7th, 1989. It ran for a total of 37 seasons, so that's quite a long run. And for quite a number of years, it was, from what I was reading, the longest kind of, not just TV show, but the longest running kind of musical show like that. And then Top of the Pops, which is a British musical show, kind of... they became the longest running show a few years later after they went off air.
Yeah. But American Bandstand, launched so many careers because there's so many major artists that debuted on that show.
Oh yeah, and American Bandstand. If you notice the logo of it, I posted on our page today for American Bandstand to let people know we're going to be doing this today. American Bandstand was also known as AB. That's the reason for that abbreviated logo. So AB for short, and later became known as Bandstand. In fact, the theme song for American Bandstand is known as Bandstand Boogie. And there's two different versions. Apparently the original version, which I posted on our page, and then there's a later version that Barry Manilow, of all people, recorded, and they started playing his version in later episodes.
Well, when I was young, I learned all those dance moves. I remember in past podcasts.
Yeah.
These podcasts that we're doing, we've talked about it before, where one of those little known facts about myself is that I know how to do all those 60s dance moves. And the classic example of those dance moves is the dance scene in Pulp Fiction.
Oh, yeah.
Because they do a lot of them, the real popular ones, too, in Pulp Fiction. And so every once in a while, I'll bring that up. And there was one time when I was at work, working, because, of course I was the older guy. I was, working with a bunch of people that were a lot younger than me. I would show them, the monkey, the jerk, the twist, the swim, all kinds of, all these different dance moves. And where did I learn them? From the dance shows like American Bandstand, and American Bandstand was the top dog, but they also spawned a lot of other dance shows that were also produced by Dick Clark.
Oh yeah, and we should also know another thing we've talked about in past episodes is American Bandstand was kind of really the first of this type of musical program. The only thing that I can really think that predated this was, which we've also talked about in past episodes, that's come up from time to time, is the Ed Sullivan Show. And the only difference between this and the Ed Sullivan Show, Ed Sullivan was more of a variety show where it wasn't just all based around music. It could different types of talents. People could come on.
It could be comedians. It could be impressionists. I remember seeing Fred. I think his name's Fred Gorshin.
Okay.
Who went on to become the Riddler. On the '60s Batman series. He was first time I ever saw him was on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he was doing impersonations of famous actors, and he was amazingly good.
Oh yeah.
At that, but a lot of people don't even know him as his early career as an impressionist. Well, kind of impressionists back in those days was the equivalent to tribute bands today.
Yeah, I think probably
instead of doing a reproduction of a band, what the impressionists were doing was they would just do it like a stand-up, and they would sound like this actor and sound like that actor. And there's many very, very famous impressionists, Fred Gorshin was one of those first ones, that I think I had ever seen, and when I was a little kid watching the Ed Sullivan Show.
I think too. Speaking of Frank Gorshin, I think we talked about this. That after his run on the Batman show as a Riddler, he became quite famous doing his act in Las Vegas, and became more known for that. So that's kind of, I guess, a return to his roots. But also as you're talking about American Bandstand, once it started airing, I mean, it became known for my mother even told me when she was little, like in the 50s, that when this first came on TV, that was the whole reason people were tuning in was to watch the dances and stuff. And we gotta remember, this show predates like MTV or even music videos, and they did American Bandstand was one of the first places where they had kind of what you'd call promo clips and stuff. Not quite music videos, but they have these little musical clips of the acts that would be on the show. And like you mentioned, like different dance moves, like the Twist by Chevy Checker. I mean, that's where a lot of these songs and these dances that they had would first become famous on American Bandstand.
Well, that was everyone at home's source
for music,
for finding out what the new cutting-edge dance moves were.
Yeah, and just to give people a little more background on American Bandstand, Bandstand, which again later went on to become known as Bandstand, was an American music performance and dance TV show. There were various versions of the show, but the most popular version of the show was hosted by Dick Clark from 1956 until the final season in 1989. And Gar, this is what you and I were talking about going on before we went on there today, that we knew nothing about. I mean, when I think of American Bandstand, I can say at least throughout my lifetime of my years of life, I only know one host, and that's Dick Clark. So I was quite amazed to learn in doing the research for the show today that there was a host that predates Dick Clark, and his name was Bob Horn. And real quick, Bob Horn didn't have too long of a tenure with American Bandstand because he got involved with a drunk driving accident, and then they also found out he had some kind of sexual affair with a 13-year-old, and they let him go for morals clauses. But interestingly enough, I read they didn't make too big of a deal about it in the press. They just fired him. Nobody really knew why he was fired, and then went a search for a new host, and they found Dick Clark.
Well, actually, when I did my research, I found out that Dick Clark actually worked
on the show,
on the crew, or I don't know what his function was, but he was part of the mixture of people that were putting on American Bandstand, and the impression I got from they said, well, how about you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That he just wound up stepping up from whatever he was doing, in putting the show on, to standing in front of the camera with the microphone.
And just think about that decision. I mean, basically an unknown. They're going with an unknown talent, and let's just think about the impact that decision had, not just on American Bandstand, but on the future of entertainment. I mean, Dick Clark, by the time he died, a number of years ago, he was a beloved entertainer. I mean, besides American Bandstand, like you said, he'd gone to form Dick Clark Productions, and he produced a lot of TV shows. He's known for the Rock and Eve celebration they have every year. Even since his death, it's kind of still called that in his honor, So that decision alone had a huge impact on entertainment.
Well, they used to refer to him as the perpetual teenager or something like that.
Yeah, in fact, that had a lot to do with why they picked him. They realized the original host, Bob Horn, he was like this middle-aged guy. They didn't really think he fit in with the kids that were coming, dancing on the shows and that, and they thought Dick Clark, he had a lot more of a youthful look. He looked like, like he could better relate to the kids that were coming on the show and the young kids listening to the music at that time, and that had a lot to do with why they picked him.
Well, yeah, they used to call him America's oldest teenager.
Yeah, that's why.
For many years, I used to always say that Dick Clark was a vampire.
Yeah. I mean, never slept.
He never aged.
Yeah. I mean, Dick Clark also, as you were saying, served as the show's producer. The show featured teenage dancers dancing to top 40 music, and the songs were introduced by Clark and also by at least one popular act. Over the years, American Bandstand featured a wide range of diverse acts that included everyone from Jerry Lee Lewis to Run DMC.
And back in the 1950s, by today's standards, Jerry Lee Lewis would be considered a total metalhead.
Oh yeah.
He was the Johnny Cash before Johnny Cash anybody knew who Johnny Cash was. And Johnny Cash went way back, around the same period. But Jerry Lee Lewis at that time, nobody really knew that much about Johnny Cash, but man, Jerry Lee Lewis was a household name.
And what is
which also he kind of has a sordid past also that's very similar to
Bob Horn.
What's his name? Horn.
Yeah.
Rob Horn or Robert Horn.
Yeah. Went by many names from what I understand.
I think Jerry Lee Lewis wound up marrying his 13-year-old cousin, which by the standards of that time, that was like massively taboo, because we're talking about the 50s, which was, when you compare the 50s to now, it's so conservative, back then compared to now. Yeah,
and if you've seen that movie, Great Balls of Fire, that was a huge part of controversy, during the height of his popularity. We're talking about Jerry Lee Lewis, and
he weathered the storm, which is really kind of trippy. That America just kind of looked the other way. But by today's standards, he'd be hauled off to jail.
I mean,
and same thing with Horn. He went down on morality charges because he was it wound up being discovered that he was, he got busted with one 13-year-old girl. Yeah. But he had a reputation of many young underage girls being in the studio while he was spinning records and doing unspeakable things.
I mean, I wasn't around, but it sounds like, if you ask me, it sounds like some grooming was going on there. And what a place to do it. I mean, he sure had a whole slew of girls coming in to dance on the show and that. And it's very interesting because today's modern culture, I mean, if this guy was still around, in the entertainment, he definitely would be canceled, and all this stuff would be coming out, and they'd be doing everything to, shame the hell out of him. And it's very interesting that if you look, like I started looking up on Bob Horn, I found some stuff about him, but there was not a ton of stuff about him. And the interesting thing about this is I posted on our page when we announced that we were going to be doing this show today, Gar, that 2022 marks the 70th anniversary of American Bandstand, and we're bringing that up not just because of a huge milestone that it is, but I guess 20 years ago, when the show was celebrating its 50th anniversary, they people had wanted to do some kind of celebration to honor American Bandstand. 50 years later, but they kind of did not. They decided to do nothing about it because, for some odd reason, Dick Clark, he was on the show longer than the original host Bob Horn. But what's interesting is, I guess the people behind the scenes, they just kind of want to act like American Bandstand was only with Dick Clark.
Started existing with Dick Clark.
But still, you think they could have done something to celebrate those years, and I don't know why they didn't.
Yeah.
But we're here talking about it, and I know it still means something to so many people, because interesting point you were making. I found a list online of all the different performers that appeared on American Bandstand throughout the course of the show, and what's interesting is too many names to kind of just list them all, but I'll just say this. I think they had a real knack for picking performers that would appear on the show, because almost everybody that ever performed on the show would go on to be like some kind of blockbuster act. I mean, everybody from like the Bee Gees to Def Leppard, Kiss, Aerosmith, the Beastie Boys, Madonna, and like you said, a lot of these acts when they were just first starting to break, even when you get into the 80s. People like Madonna, they would go on a show like American Bandstand to make their like television premiere or really get themselves out.
And when he approached her with the mic and asked her, what were her aspirations?
Yeah.
She said to rule the world.
She did, yeah, and she did.
And she did. For a long time, she was like at the top of the heap, man. I mean, just packing in your huge venues and putting on huge productions and everything like that. And, just like anything, all careers have their cycles.
Of course.
And, you have your beginning, you have your, where you crest, and then you have your downward, because nothing stays on top forever.
Oh, yeah, and then, how many...
But she had a long career, and she's still going, and still doing well, even though, she has a lot of other people that are, a lot more...
higher up on the...
say marketable, where she's, her career is starting to wane.
Yeah.
But... you don't have a career for that long without being talented.
Yeah. I mean, and that's why I'm making a point for. She's known these days for threatening to blow up the White House. But my point is, like you said, she's had a long career, and I think if a lot of if we were looking at a show where a lot of the acts that were on the show were like just fast flash in the pans, here one day and gone another, it wouldn't have had the impact it did. It's just that the level of the performers that many of them are still here having careers. Many of them have passed on, like a couple of members of the Bee Gees are no longer here. But again, this was all music for a time, if you know what I mean, Gar.
I certainly do, and it's just so trippy, because Dick Clark started in '56.
Yeah.
Which means that I think Bob Horn was the host for 3 or 4 years before Dick Clark.
Oh yeah. And so again, Dick Clark had a much longer run. And here's another thing. Here's a little bit of trivia for you, but I kind of just discovered this myself, but I guess it kind of makes sense. Now, do you think, Gar, that the bands that went on and they were performing on the show and performing their songs, do you think they were performing live, or do you think they were lip syncing?
It was obvious they were lip syncing, and I actually performed on a Dick Clark Productions show back in 1999/2000.
And what show was that? Do you remember?
It was a show called Your Big Break.
Okay.
And it was a nationally televised TV show, and basically what it was is they had one of their producers come to tribute band shows, and if they saw a band that they liked, that they felt would be good on their show, they would approach him backstage, and he basically approached me backstage and gave me his card and asked me if I wanted to be on this show. And what when he was describing it to me after my performance was that to me it sounded like there was this show that was going on back in the 80s, and I forgot what the name of the show was, but I really didn't like it. And they had Johnny Carson's sidekick, Ed McMahon was the host of the show, and it was a bunch of bands performing. It was kind of like a Battle of the Bands kind of show.
Cool, okay.
And when this guy was describing the show to me, it sounded like that, and I really didn't like that show. So, I basically told him that I probably wasn't going to be interested in doing it, but said, well, just, give me your card and let me think about it.
Yeah,
So then I went to rehearsal and I told the guys in the band about it, and they flipped out and they said, what? It's a nationally televised TV show, and that I'm crazy for not accepting the gig. And so I asked them. Here was my comeback, and it was true. What I was saying is the rock on those type of shows, the rock band never wins.
Yeah,
it's a competition. And the rock band never wins because the rock band is always
the underdog,
especially with Middle America. Is always considered the rebel, the guy in black, the guy with the black leather jacket. Just stay away. It's don't watch that. It's bad for you. It's going to lead you to a life of sin.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. And you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the heyday of MTV. I remember they had this VJ on there named Adam Curry. He was the original guy who hosted Headbangers Ball before they got Ricky Rackman. He kind of had this like long, beautiful kind of blonde hair, and that was the stereotype back in the day. He was the stereotype, the rocker dude type, and
well, when I told the guys in the band, I said, that the rock band never wins. They made a point to me that really hit home that I didn't think of, was that it didn't matter if the rock band wasn't going to win. It was a win for us. Just to be on a nationally televised TV show being seen by people all across America.
To get that exposure,
and I just didn't realize that. And they were right. It was a win. And so I called them back, and they put us on the show.
Wow.
And I actually have the videotape. They sent me a videotape, and it was really of the entire show too. Wow. So I don't have just my performance on the show. I have everyone else's performance that was on that show too. And I'm going to digitize it and maybe put it on YouTube so people can see it, because it's pretty trippy. Because what they did is they did. The first part of it was about me in my personal life, and just showing me doing this and doing that, and just in my personal life. And then what you would do is when your performance on the show, you come out of these couple of doors in like in a big puff of smoke, and you come out, and I came out as Dream Police, which was a Cheap Trick tribute band, and I had bleach blonde hair back in those days and everything, and we got up there and did I Want You to Want Me, for the show, because that's what the producers wanted us to do. And they actually talked to Rick Nielsen in Cheap Trick and got his blessing for us to be on the show.
Wow, how cool is that? And that was your days as Gar Xander. And Gar, the reason I brought up the stuff about the live performances actually being lip synced is because This, again, American Bandstand predates MTV. I mean, once MTV came around and all these bands started doing music videos, lip syncing became kind of a known entity. I mean, it wasn't such a well kept secret. But back in the day of American Bandstand, before MTV, I mean, I remember tuning in and thinking that these bands were performing live. I mean, again, not knowing at the time, but it's it's not such a well kept secret now. But a lot of people.
Well, this is what they told me.
Yeah.
When I did that show for Dick Clark.
Yeah.
TV leaves nothing for chance.
Yeah, yeah.
And, there's your reason why, even these major artists were lip syncing to their songs, because TV doesn't leave anything for chance.
Yeah, and here's a little bit more trivia for you now. I've never heard of Freddie Cannon, but Freddie Cannon apparently holds a record for most appearances on American Bandstand, which with a total of 110 shows. Can you imagine? One guy was on the show that many times.
Well, he had to have been a dancer.
Okay, yeah. I don't know.
Because I'm not familiar with him as a
singer,
as an artist.
Yeah.
But I'm suspecting if he was on that many episodes, I'm just spitballing, but or speculating.
Yeah.
But my suspicion is he probably was a dancer.
Yeah. Maybe I have to look that up. And again, like you were saying earlier on in the show today, the popularity of American Bandstand allowed Dick Clark to also become a media mogul. He eventually gained ownership of American Bandstand. So let's think about that. He starts off as just some crew member that is picked out to replace the original host, having no real kind of experience prior to that, maybe except for in the TV industry. Eventually becomes a host. Eventually gains ownership of American Bandstand through his own Dick Clark production company. So again, first time somebody goes from being a talent to kind of owning the show.
Well, he obviously.
Yeah.
He was a very ambitious person when he was young, because these things that he achieved, especially when he was young, he's basically blazing a trail that never existed before.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So a lot of people, just see him, he's the oldest American teenager and all that stuff. But no, when you achieve those kind of things, becoming a mogul, from a start like that, hey, why don't you try it? Let's give this guy a try. See how he does with the microphone. From that to Dick Clark Productions, he was a very motivated, ambitious person.
Yeah, and then here's another interesting tidbit about Bob Horn, the original host. It said that he was originally unhappy with his version of the show, and he's the one that wanted to change it into a dance program with teenagers dancing on live television. The dancing teenagers would dance to records being played on TV.
Well, that's called vision.
Yeah. So,
and you cannot be an entrepreneur and not have vision. That's the key element. You see things where other people don't. You see what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Because all of this stuff, dancing, all of this stuff, TV cameras, all of that stuff existed, but nobody tried that format until, he spearheaded it. Now, the guy wasn't the best guy in the world.
No.
But, there were certain reasons why he was in the position that he was in.
Yeah.
And they were things that he earned, as a worker. Fortunately, he was also the cause of his own demise.
Yeah,
I just can never stress that enough. It's a unique characteristic of being an entrepreneur. You have to be able to have
a vision
to see things where other people don't.
Yeah, and it really was foresight, vision. And what's sad is another famous Gar Boris, word that has been featured in our various episodes is trailblazers. And I think that if Bob Horn had not gone down the,
Gone down the rabbit hole?
Yeah. I mean, all these years later, he might be seen as a visionary. American Bandstand host Bob Horn, he was the one that had the vision to turn American Bandstand into a dance show. But they don't want to even mention this guy. It's all Dick Clark, and I guess in a way, rightfully so. But again, I was reading that July 9th, 1956, again, Horn was fired on Bandstand after a drunk driving arrest. Horn was also eventually brought up on morals charges, as we said, for also being part of a prostitution ring. And as we said, the job of hosting American Bandstand eventually went to Dick Clark. Now, what we should also mention at this time, Gar, when American Bandstand was first launched in 1952, it was originally shot in Philadelphia. That's where the original broadcast took place. And at the time, you got to think back what the world was like back in 1952. And quite to my amazement, because I wasn't around back then, but I've read about stuff like this, the advertisers of the show and that were very they didn't think it was correct to let black people, into the audience and stuff because advertisers might not like it. And one of the things Dick Clark did was he was kind of against that. So when they eventually moved the show to L.A., he's the one that made the decision. No, we're going to have an integrated audience. We're going to have people of all different kind of races and backgrounds, take part in our show. And it was Dick Clark that kind of, jump started that.
Dick Clark kind of did a slow transition because he actually initially, when he first, moved into the position with the microphone, he basically stayed the course with what everybody else was comfortable doing. Because then again, the 60s, there was a lot of racism that was going on, and there was a lot of marches, Martin Luther King, and there was they like to call it separate but equal, which is just complete bullshit.
Yeah.
You can't keep people separate and call them equal. That's it. They're two opposites.
Yeah.
They're not two things that can go together. And that was going on in full force back in the 60s. Right now we've had a major resurgence, in that. But back in the 1950s and the 1960s, it was against the law for interracial marriages. It was against the law.
You can't even imagine that. And
it was a very, very different time. There was a lot of squashing of things for the black community, and that was one of those things. They started out with an integrated audience, and then that's when the people with the studio and the advertisers, the sponsors and everything started, getting all, we can't have that, and all this kind of stuff. And then next thing you know, in a very thinly veiled manner, they excluded the black dancers by demanding that the only people that could be on the show had to wear a suit and tie.
Wow.
And of course, yes, that's true. They had to wear a suit and tie. But that's what white kids were wearing to
at the time,
Catholic schools, because that's the kids that were, they were attracting was from the Catholic schools, and so that's what the white boys were wearing, suit and ties, and so they could get in, but because the black kids weren't wearing that, at school, and they weren't wearing those clothes, then they couldn't get in. So it was a thinly veiled exclusion done in a way where they could just kind of elbow the blacks out of the show. And that really happened.
And it's interesting because at the same time, they would have featured guest artists such as Chubby Checker have a huge hit with the twist, and that becomes a dance and a hit song. Donna Summer, who's a big disco singer at the time, passed away, a number of years ago from cancer. But big, huge black artist. My point is, they didn't mind having these artists on the show. They had huge hits with their songs, and so both the show and the talent, I feel, kind of benefited from the fact that American Bandstand was on the air at the time.
Well, all I know is, when I was a kid and I was watching those shows and I saw all those scantily clad girls, I was in. And another key point in the history of American Bandstand took place in the spring of 1957. American Bandstand was picked up by ABC, which is a major American television network, probably the premier television network at that time. I mean, going back to 1957, I mean, you did not have cable TV like, 500 channels like we do today. Did not have all these streaming channels. I think, like I'm talking, you had maybe ABC, CBS, NBC. Those were the three networks at the time, and that was some places that back in those days, those were the only stations that were available.
And
back in the 60s, if you were in Middle America, that was it. ABC, CBS, and NBC. That was it.
And then
you had three stations to choose from.
And then Channel 28, which was your PBS.
Well, that was an LA thing.
Yeah, your
we
PBS.
Had more channels. We had let me see, KTLA, which was Channel 5, KHJ, which was Channel 9, KTTV,
Channel
which
11.
Was Channel 11, which is now Fox. And then KCOP, which was 13. Oh my gosh, I got all of them.
You and me both, and that predates cable or anything, but those were the channels back then, and the three major networks, and why it was such a big deal for ABC to pick up the show was prior to that. I mean, when ABC picked up a show, it becomes a national show. Everyone all across the United States can all of a sudden see American Bandstand. I mean, prior to that, I mean, basically a lot of people in Philadelphia and some surrounding areas, but it was not seen everywhere. And another point we should make is I was reading kind of a thing about American Bandstand that kind of became a problem was they started like airing, they'd run part of American Bandstand and then they'd run this other show like in between, and then they'd return to American Bandstand. A lot of people kind of didn't like that because they'd just be getting into American Bandstand and then they'd interrupt it with this other show and then they'd come back to American Bandstand.
Well, there's good ideas and then there's bad ideas. I don't think it took them that long to scrap that idea.
Yeah, but again, by the time ABC picks up the show, I mean, just think about that. It all of a sudden is seen nationally. Everybody all across the United States that was not able to see the show, maybe heard about it, is all of a sudden able to see it.
Well, I just, I used to watch that, and when we were kind of talking about doing this, I was telling you that at that time there was a bunch of other dance shows that were really popular too.
Oh yeah.
During the same time, there was one called Hootenanny. That was a little bit before my time, but then all of a sudden Shindig, that was during my time. That was a real popular one. It was on ABC. Also, Hullabaloo was extremely popular. That was on NBC. In fact, I think I remember seeing the Beatles perform on Hullabaloo. And then when my sister and I were kids, this was kind of, it's funny. Well, I don't know if it's really funny, but it's kind of odd because back in the 60s, both my parents worked, and my sister and I were in elementary school age kids, and we were coming home after school and spending time at home, basically being latchkey kids. And that was kind of the norm back then because they didn't know how detrimental that was. And me and my sister, it was just the norm. We came home after school, and we turn on the TV, and then there was this show. It was a dance show called Where the Action Is.
Oh, wow.
And that was also on ABC, and that was also produced by Dick Clark. And I really liked that one too, because the house band was Paul Revere and the Raiders.
Wow, that's taking it back.
And back in the mid-'60s, Paul Revere and the Raiders were huge.
Oh, yeah.
And they were kind of one of those unique bands that were, developed a theme for their band, because everybody wore kind of Paul Revere-ish outfits.
Wow.
When they were on stage, and they basically looked like Paul Revere, a whole bunch of Paul Reveres on stage, and the drummer was named Smitty.
Wow.
He was my favorite when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And all the girls used to go nuts over Mark Lindsay. Back in those days, that was kind of the beginnings of girls putting posters all over their walls.
Wow,
and I remember my sister's room, she had Bobby Sherman, Mark Lindsay from Paul Revere and the Raiders, Herman's Hermits, all the cute guys. What's his name from the TV show, David Cassidy?
Oh, okay.
You see what I mean? All the girls would have their pictures on their walls, and their walls would be covered with pictures of all these cute guys that are in the bands. And so that show, Where the Action Is, really had it was more of a local show. It wasn't a nationally televised show. I don't think. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just really kind of hit the chord for the kids, watching these shows, because they had a number of acts that would perform lip syncing to their to their hits, and I remember there was this one band that was on there, and all the drummer had was a snare and a cymbal.
Wow.
And they're playing this song, Winchester Cathedral, you're taking me down. And the singer's singing that with a big, what was that, like the cheerleaders kind of looked, it wasn't an electric megaphone, but it was like one of those cone things that you could, shoot your voice out through. Yeah. And so the singer was on there with that, and that's what he was singing through. Wow.
Now, Gar, this other
so weird. I'm bringing up my childhood.
That's part of why we do this. And this show obviously had this other show we're talking about that you brought up had a huge impact on you. But at the time, or even as you look back on, you kind of think Dick Clark was trying. Okay, well, we've had success with American Bandstand. Let's try to copy that. Let's try to do something like that. Or do you think it was really something of its own?
Well, everything, the way that it all, chronologically, basically the show matured. It grew. It became, they were in constant search for new things to do to keep it interesting. Because if you're just relying on just the dancing and Dick Clark with the microphone, that's going to get old after a while. And so they were constantly, developing new things to add to the show, new twists to add to the show, just to keep things interesting and keep it fresh.
Yeah, and on that note, another interesting thing that I'm going to have fun posting next week when we post the show we're doing today is, besides the musical guest and that they'd have on the show, I found some old interview clips, like eventually, every once in a while they'd have like people like guest stars kind of just show up, like some of the cast from, for example, Welcome Back Kotter would show up, and Dick Clark in between the bands performing and the people dancing would
keep things interesting.
Would interview some of these guys. Hey, we got so and so here. John Travolta or whoever from Welcome Back Kotter. Come on up, John.
Back then, that was what he was famous for, and a lot of people don't even know anything about Welcome Back Kotter. But John Travolta was he was all
Teenager
on posters in almost every girl's bedroom.
And we should know.
All the girls were in love with John Travolta when he was on Welcome Back.
And we should know this is like when he's pretty much a teenager, before he ever appeared in Grease or any of those famous movies that he's known for these days. I mean, this predates all
this. He was really young. He was a kid.
Yeah, the kid, and a dumb kid, but he was probably the most popular cast member on there. And the other reason when we decided to do the show on American Bandstand, I felt it was important to do this show was because, as you were saying, Gar, that American Bandstand inspired other long-running music programs, and eventually I think we're going to have to do an episode on each of these. But again, American Bandstand's the one that kind of came first, so that's why we're doing this today. But those other long-running music programs, such as Soul Train, Solid Gold, and a British TV show Top of the Pops, which is kind of known worldwide. But I mean, just
that show was hugely popular back in there. Not here in the U.S., but in Great Britain and in Europe. Oh my gosh, that was a hugely popular show.
And where Solid Gold was kind of like a disco, more of a disco themed show, disco themed music. Soul Train was kind of like R&B and more of a black inspired show, but everybody was tuning in, and that's kind of what set Soul Train apart from American Bandstand. It was more black artists, whereas American Bandstand was kind of a little bit of everything,
Well, see, another thing that people don't know now, or people have forgotten about now, is a lot of these black famous artists, that were performing back in those days. The black audiences were not attending his shows, so these were black artists that were, and when they would do their shows, they would be playing in front of an all-white audience,
which is kind of interesting.
And it was because the blacks didn't want to go because they just didn't feel that it was for them. It was for the whites. And so, most of the shows that the black artists were doing back in the 60s were to white audiences. They were not playing to black audiences.
Yeah, that's interesting. We definitely going to have to do an episode, especially on Soul Train, for so many obvious reasons, as you just mentioned. And another few things we should mention about the show American Bandstand, they had a few different parts to the show. They had this thing called Rate a Record, where Dick Clark would pick an audience member, and they would each they pick like two audience members, and they'd discuss two records on a scale from 35 to 98, and then Clark would average the two the two different records or the two different opinions, and each of them would kind of be asked to justify their score. And so it's basically picking two audience members and talking about two records at the time and what each audience member is saying. And they rather just say, I like it. Okay, well, what do you like about it? And they'd kind of get into a discussion. And so that was kind of one of the main things they did on the show.
Well, then again, it always keeps it fresh. Now, the Rate a Record thing actually started with Bob Horn.
Okay, I was.
It was one of those brainchilds of him, but the difference was that his connection with the audience. He was like a 50-year-old, not so good looking, overweight guy. Yeah. With the microphone, doing this with the kids. So the relating between the young audience and him wasn't that good. That's the big thing that changed when Dick Clark took over, because that was a conscious, targeted thing that Dick Clark wanted to do, was make it much more of a connection rather than an older person talking down to younger people, because that's how people were feeling when he was doing it. He felt I'm way up here and you're way down there.
Yeah,
and that was was his approach towards relating with the audience. But Dick Clark really connected, and the kids really felt like he was one of them. So when they did the Raid a Record, they were much more into it, and and then there was two things that came out of Raid a Record that are common, that just somewhere it started early on, but it just became a reoccurring thing that was always said in many shows when they would rate the record. How come you like the song? Because it's got a really good beat,
and you can dance to it.
Those are the two things that came out of Rate a Song.
Yeah.
And every time, and I remember as a kid, every time they would do that, that's what somebody was, it's got a great bit, a great beat. And then they'd read another kid, I can dance to it. You know what I mean? It just became like this, that everybody wound up keep saying it over and over and over and over. And those two things just kind of got a life of their own.
It may have been one of the first corniest catchphrases in TV history, and I say that because again, it's one of those phrases that when we think of American Bandstand, that's one of the things you first think of. And again, these catchphrases these days are much more calculated, but back in 1952, whenever they came up with that, it was quite original. That's the thing. If you look at Dick Clark as the host of the show too, and his talent, I think he just got more of a natural talent. Maybe the fact that he wasn't this jaded Hollywood actor from before, just got picked some guy from the crew, when the original host didn't work out. I mean, he had much more of a natural, raw talent, I think. It was just kind of so obvious.
He connected immediately.
Yeah. And then here's...
Immediately.
Yeah. And it says the only singer to ever co-host the show with Dick Clark was Donna Summer, who was, like I said, in the 70s. She was a huge disco star.
She was the disco queen.
Disco queen, yeah.
70s.
Yeah. And here's another little bit of interesting TV trivia. It says Dick Clark's co-host for most of the 1960s was announcer Charlie O'Donnell. You may know that name, Gar, because Charlie O'Donnell would later go on to announce other TV shows such as Wheel of Fortune, as well as the $100,000 Pyramid, which was hosted and produced by Dick Clark himself.
Well, it takes a certain type of voice to wind up having a career just, making announcements on shows. A new car!
I mean, yeah, that's the name and a voice that, that has went on to become famous. And it says American Bandstand moved towards the 1980s. The ratings began to fall. There were many reasons for this, Gar, for the falling ratings. As I said at the top of the show, once the 1980s roll around, 1981 to be exact, the launch of MTV. September 13th, 1986, AB reduced Bandstand from a full hour to a 30-minute show. Now, again, this is in 1986 we're talking now, and this is at a point the show's been on for many, many years. I mean, we've had a couple of generations live through this show at this point, and like you said, most shows, most TV shows, most musical acts, most anything in entertainment kind of at some point, starts to kind of not be as popular as it once was, and that had a lot to do with this.
Well, everything takes its course. Nothing stays on top forever.
Yeah.
And it is kind of sad, because we, become connected, with these shows. These are our personal memories that we hold dear and everything. And, so hopefully, that's the reason why we're doing this. This whole podcast thing is so people don't forget these things.
What's interesting is...
Or people that got to enjoy these things just like you and I, they can reminisce.
Yeah.
Maybe we can spark some of those memories for other people, good memories. Oh my gosh, other people remembering where they were at that time and what they were doing at that time.
Yeah.
And that's never going to be a bad thing.
No. And see, that's the thing is, like when we come up with ideas to do these shows, what we're going to talk about, one thing I have a lot of pride in, not only is it stuff that we really believe in, that we really, have latched onto, you and me, things that we're huge fans of. So that's why we have so much love when we talk about this stuff. But I mean, we do everything from classic TV shows, movies, some of our favorite records and musical acts. I mean, like American Bandstand, I thought, okay, this is going to be something fun to talk about for so many obvious reasons, but also because we've talked about a lot of classic TV shows. We talked about movies in the past. Okay, this is the first time we're talking about probably the first premier kind of musical TV performance. At the time, going back to 1952, this is the first show of that kind. So I thought, okay, and then next week we're going to be talking about The Price is Right, when we do this in 2 weeks. So a game show, that'd be the first time we're talking about a game show. So we try to provide and, do something a little different each time. And I think we've accomplished that.
It's all pop culture.
Yeah, and Gar, before we wrap this up for today, just a few more notes. At Dick Clark's request, the final ABC broadcast featured Laura Branigan performing Shattered Glass. I don't really even remember Laura Branigan, but I kind of remember the song.
I remember her.
I remember the song, but so it's one of those things. But I mean, an interesting bit of trivia. That's the last one to ever appear on American Bandstand as far as the ABC broadcast. And then what eventually was kind of a final nail in the coffin was for American Bandstand came on October 7th, 1989, with the show, which was now hosted by comedian David Hirsch. I've never even heard of David Hirsch. And at that time, it was no longer on on ABC. They moved it to the
it was on
USA Network. USA Network. So that was a big thing too, because all of a sudden you go from being on a major network like ABC to this up and coming cable network.
Days, that was definitely going steps down. But the reason why Dick Clark did that was because the USA Network would give him an hour, and the major networks would only give him a half an hour. Yeah,
and so again, so they had this new host, David Hirsch. He was a comedian at the time, and he hosted the show for 26 weeks. But after 26 weeks of doing that, American Bandstand ended its run of 37 seasons and 3,000 episodes. Kind of interesting.
Well, when you look at it, I mean, really, that's for every person that was involved in American Bandstand.
Yeah, and
having a show that successful for that long, that's something to be hugely proud of.
Yeah, and I can't think of any other, off the top of my head, I can't really think of any other TV show that was on that long that has 3,000 episodes. Just think about that.
Yes. I mean, really, that I don't think a lot of people really think about those kind of things, but no, that is something for every single person that was involved in putting that show on. They all played their part in making that show as good as it was.
Yeah.
And anybody that I ever meet in my entire life, I will always tell them how much I appreciated that they took part in doing that show and bringing such a great show to America.
Yeah, and in closing for today's show, Gar, I wanted to make people aware of this because I came across this that I was kind of looking to see if they had released American Bandstand, any of the episodes like on DVD or anything, and they hadn't. But what's interesting, what you can do is you can go on Amazon and you can download like certain episodes as far as being able to listen to the music and some of the performances. So there is some of that for people that maybe weren't there and want to be able to check it out. And what's really neat that I'm going to look forward to doing next week when I post today's show is I come across so many great... you can go on YouTube, just type in American Bandstand, and all kind of stuff will come as far as Dick Clark and the different performances. But I mean, the number of live performances that I'm going to be posting, it's going to be fun and take us back, I think.
Oh man, go for it! Go for it, Jason! Do it!
We will. And Gar,
I love this.
And Gar,
I really hope we're really, sparking good memories for people.
I know
by bringing all of this stuff up and posting stuff like that, on the Facebook, for people to re-experience.
Yeah, because
the past, some of these things, it's just so sad to think that that once they're forgotten, they're gone forever. And you and I are here to try to extend the life of these things that we're talking about.
And see, you and I, when we do,
they're wonderful things.
Yeah, it's a huge part of our life. And the thing, Gar, with why we do the show too, is because I think when people listen to these shows, they can hear the passion you and me have for this stuff. It's like you said, it's taking us back to a special time in our lives when these shows really, and even all these years later, I watch some of this stuff as reruns they have on TV, and it still means something to me. And like you said, it's one thing for people to listen to these episodes of Gar Borras' Time Machine that we do, and they can hear our passion and maybe get a little excited about it. But that's why I put up the Facebook page, because I don't want them to just tune into our podcast. I want them to also be able to kind of get an idea of what we're talking about. So that's why we post the old clips.
Feel it,
we want
breathe it, smell it.
Yeah, this is what we're talking about. This is why we get so. So Gar Borras, thanks for taking us back in your time machine today. We'll do this again in 2 weeks, and then, like I said, we're going to be talking about The Price is Right, and we're going to be doing that because that's celebrating a huge anniversary this year, and it was I think the first ever major game show on TV. So that's why we're doing it, and we'll see you then. Take care, Gar.
Dude, thank you so much, Jason.
Okay, bye-bye.
Chaotic Drift Magazine.